not affordable. And I have 5 minutes for today's Live for Five, episode 13, to talk about unaffordable housing. Now, if you've been watching what I'm talking about, what I stand for any amount of time, you know that number one is affordable housing. Housing is creeping away, becoming more unaffordable for everyone. And it's a complex issue, as we've said before. I've set my timer here because there's no way we're going to tackle this and solve all this like world peace in 5 minutes. But there's multiple levels of government need to be attacking this issue, solving this issue together: municipal, provincial, and federal. As someone who's running for your provincial MLA for the Green Party, I want you to know, even as all of those levels of government should be working together, it's important that you know, I want you to know what the provincial government is doing, what their policies are to alleviate the cost of housing and making it more affordable. And yes, you're seeing a bit of a smirk on my face because you might as well laugh as cry when you hear what the current government in New Brunswick is doing. There's so much I can throw at you. So I want to unpack this. I've set my timer because it's going to ring at 5 minutes. We'll probably have to pick this up tomorrow. Uh, in a nutshell, in the last 4 years under this government, renters in New Brunswick, let's talk about renters and homeowners. We're not going to demonize either party. It's unaffordable for both. Okay, so that's the important thing to start with. Under this government, renters have seen their rent increase 30% since 2020. Some numbers say 28, some numbers say 34, an average of 30%. Now, if you're a renter, you know how terrifying that is. I was a renter in Toronto for many, many years with my family, my young children, and we lived in fear of the rent increase. Thankfully, in Ontario, there is a rent increase limitation, otherwise known as a rent cap. That allowed us to survive until it was unaffordable, even then. So being a renter in New Brunswick, I can't even imagine what it's like. I can only imagine what it's like to see your rent increase 30%. Now, in 2022 pandemic era, the government of New Brunswick actually imposed a rent cap, which is something that the Green Party is always advocating for on behalf of tenants and renters as a protection. Because again, I know what it's like to live in fear of the rent increase and wonder if you've got to move. That is the reality for renters in New Brunswick. So that rent cap was imposed, which meant that owners of properties could not arbitrarily raise the rent as they had been able to do before. But that rent cap was removed after 1 year. The price that was set then, and it wasn't a rent cap, but what the government said was, if the cost of the rent increases more than 3.6%, then the tenant could apply to the provincial government for that rent increase to be slowly phased in. So the rent increase would go ahead. There was nothing the tenant could do about that, but they would get some relief in how fast it would be implemented. That is a half measure. It is not good for tenants, and tenant advocacy groups like Acorn are fully opposed to that. Housing experts, housing affordability experts, professors, they say that a rent cap is the only way to limit runaway housing unaffordability. So that 3.6 was levied for 1 year, and just recently, friends, it was increased again. That means that the new number is 4.7%, that property owners, can increase the rent on a tenant before they can apply for any sort of relief. A couple of problems here, of course. It has gone up again. The price of rent has effectively gone up again to 4.7% before they can apply for relief. There's the timer. So landowners can still, in New Brunswick, uh, raise the rent however high they want. And in some cases, we have seen tenants report, Acorn reports this, some rents have increased 40, 50, or even 60% on their tenants because there is no rent cap. All it means is that the tenant can then look at their rent increase and say, oh my gosh, I can't afford this, and then apply to the government to have that rent increase slowly phased in. We're not talking about a rejection of the rent increase. Landlords can still raise the rent however high they want based on market demand. Well, we are seeing more and more people needing to rent. That is, we are seeing home ownership decrease in this country, and that continues to be a major problem for renters in our riding, in our province, who face no protection. I do have sympathy for landowners, property owners, because their tax assessments are going up. We need to talk more about this tomorrow and pick it up from there, because this is live for 5, not live for 10 or 15 or 24 hours. So I do want to pick this up tomorrow and talk about, we'll kind of review what we talked about here today. But that is to say, things are becoming even more unaffordable under this government. And what the Green Party and me as your MLA will want to see and be advocating for in the legislature is what housing affordability experts are saying is the only method for controlling unaffordable housing, and that is a rent cap. By the way, PEI has a rent cap, and Nova Scotia has a rent cap. We are the only maritime province that doesn't have one, and as I say, that's the only way I could survive in Ontario. I know that for sure. We'll talk tomorrow more about what this means for property owners and land owners, people who own buildings. But the Green Party, we are always advocating, if we're going to talk about how we want more affordability, we've got to talk about how to give that teeth and really make that happen. And a rent cap, when you just look around, majority of other provinces have this. It also doesn't affect supply. All right, more on that tomorrow. Join me tomorrow for part 2 of unaffordable housing and how we as the Green Party, myself as your MLA, are going to tackle this for affordable